if I can, thinking about tonight, I just wanted to try to maybe pick just one anecdote that could maybe colour why I thought that the biography of Daphne Park was worth writing. And we'll go back to 1944, and Daphne is 22. She's in the Fanny, the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, which is a sort of an auxiliary service to the army. And she's posted to Milton Hall in Peterborough to train Jedburghs in coding. And the Jeds were teams of 3 people, 3 men, who were going to be dropped behind German lines immediately before D-Day to coordinate the activities of the French resistance and to attack the German reinforcements that would be coming to the beaches in Normandy. Very, very highly trained. Daphne was teaching them in their codes. And she was there for about 3 months, and she started to hear mutterings about the commanding officer, a Colonel Spooner. Indian Army, but very pucka. And his idea really of training special forces was to have them at 6 o'clock in the morning, which they had no problem with, but not doing drill and parade ground stuff. And she took her mutterings down to London, and she spoke to her superior, and he encouraged her, he's a bit mischievous, to write a letter of complaint. So she wrote a letter of complaint. This 22-year-old girl in a man's army, in a country engaged in this extraordinary life and death struggle. And she made her complaint. And of course there was war. He upbraided her. He accused her of sleeping with her trainees. Oh, and she was court-martialed. And because she was subject to secrecy, she wasn't able to put up any form of defence. And so she had her sergeant's stripes ripped from her shoulders, Dreyfus style, and she was then asked to reduced to the ranks as a volunteer. 3 weeks later, she was summoned by the head of SOE, General Gubbins, and he said, "Look, Daphne, we're really sorry, but we've done you a bad turn here. We know that Spooner really wasn't the right sort of chap at all. In fact, what we've done is we've promoted him, and we've made him in charge of all the camps now instead of a camp, but he can do no harm. But I'm afraid there's nothing we can do for you. This is the way things are. Just go off and be a volunteer, and that's it." And so off she went to be a volunteer, and she was training French resistance in their codes. A month later, 2 Jedburghs who were stationed in Algiers arrived in London. And there was 18 teams of Jeds who had been sent to Algiers to be parachuted into the southern part of France to support D-Day and the second invasion of France. But for whatever reason, they became isolated, and they were mouldering away in Algiers. The war was taking place. They were not going to go anywhere, and they were getting desperate. So they smuggled themselves on board an American general's flight to London and went in to see Gubbins and said, General said, "We've got 18 teams of Jeds out here in Algiers. Nothing is happening. We can't enter. What we need is a briefing officer." And Gubbins said, "I'm sorry, guys," but he said, "all my people are committed. I have nobody to give you. That's the way it has to be." So they went out, these 2 hard men. One of them had a lifetime career in the CIA. And these 2 hard men went out, and they sought out Daphne, and they had lunch with her. And over lunch they decided that this 22-year-old volunteer in Fanny would make an ideal briefing and dispatching officer. So they went back into Gubbins and they said, "We have our briefing dispatching officer, it's Stafford." And he said, "But she's only a volunteer, she's been reduced to the ranks." They said, "She's our woman, we want her. Go and have her made an officer." So Gubbins went in and he spoke to Marion Gamwell in Fanny, an extraordinary woman, and said, "I want Daphne Park made an officer." And they would hemmed and hawed and all this type of stuff. And Gamwell said, "Oh, send her in to see me." And so Daphne was summoned in to see Gamwell. And Gamwell said, "Now, Daphne," said, "if you do this again," she said, "you have to promise you'll never do it again." And she said, "On the contrary," said, "if the same situation happens, this is exactly what I'll do." And Gamwell said, "Well, I wouldn't have made you an officer if you had to give me any other answer. Off you go to Algiers and get these 18 things." So off Daphne went to Algiers, flying in an RAF flight full of air fleet marshals and generals. And they were turning around to her saying, "Now listen, dear, don't worry if this plane jigs a bit and all that." And she said, "Don't worry, sir, I won't worry, sir." So on. She arrived in Algiers and she briefed and dispatched 18 teams. She was the last person that they saw. She gave them their battle exhortation and sent them off to war. And they didn't all come back. And then, when her war was over, she went back to England. And she went back to the camp to meet her lover, because Spooner was right. Daphne had fallen in love with one of her trainees, an American Marine, a guy called Douglas Pizzata. But it wasn't to be. For him it was a wartime fling. For her it was something that broke her heart, and I'm not sure that she ever fully recovered. And that was Daphne Park's War. And now you know why I wrote a story.